Welcome to my new immersive stream recap series, which we will be playing as the Seleucids in Rome 2 Total War using the Divide Et Impera 3-part mod, as well as the 4 turns per year mod. For those wondering, Divide Et Impera, or DEI as I will refer to it from here onward, is an overhaul mod that quite essentially turns Rome 2 into the game I wanted it to be. I have bordering on 1,000 hours in Rome 2, and I owe hundreds of them to this mod alone. DEI overhauls economy, diplomacy, how battle AI works, meaning melee fights take longer, as well as adding a class and population system, and implementing a supply system for armies and navies. So military campaigns end up needing a sense of planning and forward thinking. If anyone wants an extensive preview of the mod from someone more qualified, I would suggest Republic of Plays video, which I will pop in the comments and the description below. We will be playing as the Seleucids, one of the descendant empires left in the aftermath of Alexander the Great's death. We start in a precarious position of strength in the respect that we are a great power, however a large volume of said power lies in our satrapies, who mostly hold land in our eastern reaches. They are on the verge of declaring independence and waging war against us. The ungrateful swines. On top of the situation to the east, relations with Egypt are at boiling point, and hostilities are expected to spill over very shortly. As we look at our diplomatic situation and scout for future threats, you can see we are a small section of white surrounded by red tormentors with the occasional green in the form of satrapies. But the question remains, can they be trusted? Like any good successful start in Total War, we begin by looking to access as much trade as possible. Economy is the backbone of any playthrough, and seeing as we will likely be fighting on many fronts, this is a necessary process. A quick look at our family shows that the Seleucid dynasty is stretched thin, with only Antiochus I and his family member Antiochus II Soter, unclear if any relation, remaining at this point. We have a reasonable political holding, with roughly 50% of the seats of our court. If we have one glaring weakness from the offset, it is that we need more members of our dynasty and family, especially with both of our concurrent family members commanding an army, one in the west and one in the east. With the dynasty situation being addressed, and the seeds of a strong trading economy planted, we then look to our buildings and infrastructure, which is where we ended up investing the majority of our treasury at this point. As the Seleucids, you have a vast farming plateau with access to the Mediterranean for trade. This is something that the council suggested we should use. You should note at this point that the council I refer to as Twitch chat, whom will get to add their input and vote on major events throughout the playthrough as it unfolds. We then began moving the small yet well-equipped army we had at Antioch south towards the border with Egypt, all the while recruiting our unmustered soldiers to the standard while we continued marching. Then the unexpected happened. Nabatea declared war on us out of the blue. Something that came as a shock, as we had been attempting to negotiate a trade deal with them just weeks before. Even more surprisingly, every single one of our satrapies joined us in the war. Perhaps this was something we could use to our advantage to hold us together. Our main army, led by our heir and family member Antiochus II, marched through the desert towards the Nabatean capital. As the weeks passed, Egyptian scouts had been spotted in the dunes around us, and lo and behold, a declaration of war came in. We had been expecting this, just not quite so soon. With the Egyptians likely to capitalise on the element of surprise, we began rush preparations to fight a war on multiple fronts. The Egyptians held Cyprus and a single city in southern Asia Minor, meaning an army would have to be raised to move against the threats there. In fact, our only real standing army was currently in Nabatian lands, stuck between two different enemies, evaluating what the best move for us was. The council, that's Twitch chat, voted unanimously to peace with the Nabatians, and press on with hostilities against the Egyptians. Our heir and his brave men made the decision to retreat back towards friendly territory, but not without first making an attempt to cut the enemy off from their most northern settlement of Tyros. He had positioned himself at the bridge, which was the only crossing, meaning if the enemy wished to press north, they had to move through us, or attempt to navigate the desert. As hostilities were about to come to a head in the south, an army was hastily assembled to press towards Side, the holding the Egyptians had to our northwest. Whilst this stood, our northern lands were not safe. The task of leading this army fell to one of our political rivals, an opportunity for them to gain some favour. As attention turned back towards the south, and Tyros, and with a pitched battle seeming inevitable, our army decided to take the initiative and attack Side, placing it under siege. It had been left unguarded and exposed, with only a handful of professional soldiers guarding it, supported by locals who were loyal to the Ptolemy dynasty, which was really a win-win for us, saving us much hassle in the aftermath of the battle. As we approached the city, it was decided that we would attack with our entire force from one side, while our small navy assaulted the harbour. The pathetic defensive ships of the enemy landed outside of the town and were trampled to death by our elephants and general's bodyguard, meaning we had control of the sea. With this in mind, we pressed into the city, attacking the enemy on two sides at once, quickly overwhelming them. Our slingers doing just that, slinging death in from above, whether it be a rock, arrow or projectile. Beyond this point, the pathetic garrison crumpled quickly, and as you can see from the end result, did not set us back at all. Despite a decisive victory, there was no time to celebrate. We moved to the south and cut off the enemy's advance by setting up a defensive position at the bridge, where we lay in wait. Then, another diplomat, this time from our satrapies, requesting that we assist them and join their war against Medea. The council, that's Twitch chat, voted once again to aid our satrapies and join them in the war. Just how much help we would offer them remained to be seen. As one diplomat left, another entered, this time informing us of a new faction rising in the north called Pontus. Many councilmen remarked that they wanted to fight against Pontus, and it should be of the utmost urgency that we begin hostilities against them, quoting Pontus delanda est. Don't want to play as Pontus. While the drama of these diplomatic events echoed its way through society, there was no time to rest for our armies. The siege of Side was beginning. We were assaulting from both land and sea and found ourselves outnumbered by the enemy as they rallied large numbers of the local populace to their cause. Our navy was tasked with sinking the enemy general, who had just arrived at the town before the battle and had not had time to disembark, his elite bodyguard unit posing the biggest threat to a swift victory. Thankfully, our purpose-built warships made light work of his escort, and he was last seen trying to strip himself of his armour before going below the waves. While their attention was on the naval engagement, the enemy actually sallied out of the town and attacked us, much to our surprise. Our strong front line made up of hoplites and local warriors held firm, while quick manoeuvring and expert horsemanship of our Sarissa lancers saw the enemy's move thwarted, and before long we were able to turn the enemy's counterattack into a trap that they could not easily escape from. With two decisive victories against the Egyptians, confidence was at an all-time high. However, we were about to face our first real test. The main Egyptian army had marched north from Alexandria, and after a few months in Jerusalem to prepare, marched north to engage us at our defensive stronghold we had established at the bridge. This time it would not be local farmers, hunters and tradesmen. We would be faced by the professional warriors of the Nile. As we deployed and surveyed the battlefield, we realised there was an area of the river shallow enough for soldiers to cross. With this situation, our army would have to be split between the bridge and this crossing, dividing our already overstretched units. Antiochus II then made the decision to concentrate his forces around the bridge crossing and allow the enemy to cross at the shallows, hoping to defeat one army before the other could reach his forces. The Sarissa lancers and slingers covering his unit's redeployment and slowing the enemy, picking off any stragglers where the opportunity presented itself. As our defensive position was reorganised, the clattering of footsteps on wooden planks became deafening. The enemy were crossing. In an attempt to choke point the bridge, we scrambled our pikemen. They attempted to hold the line, but they had gotten into position too late. Gaps had formed at their flanks and we did not have the spare manpower available to close them. As the battle for the bridge was raging on, the enemy's main force began manoeuvring into position to attack our flank, which was where we had made the decision to deploy the main body of our forces. The fronts clashed and a long line of melee broke out. Our slingers were peppering the enemy where they could, but our cavalry were what would be needed to save the day. We had to allow the enemy enough time to be fully engaged with our front line so our cavalry could freely manoeuvre around and attack them in the rear. A mass rout was what we were hoping for. While we bought time on the other side, our pikes began showing cracks and our elephants were sent in to buy us some time. The bridge only had to hold until the enemy's main army was routed. Exhausted bodies fell on both sides as the fight continued for the bridge. At one point, units from both sides were attempting to flee for their lives. Our side was holding for now. Meanwhile, our cavalry had managed to rear-charge the enemy who had attempted to flank our lines and attack our rear, with the ambusher becoming the ambushed, the first chink in the enemy's armour showing. It was at this point our entire bridge line collapsed. If I'm being honest, we didn't even see it happen, as so much emphasis had been placed upon cavalry command. We now found ourselves in the situation of having to win the main engagement, and then be prepared to immediately turn around and fight the enemy's force coming from the bridge. Luckily, our cavalry was making light work of the enemy's main line, and numerous rear charges in quick succession caused the mass rout we had been hoping for. A quick reorg and rest for the cavalry, mixed with well-timed inspire and rally abilities, allowed us to stop the enemy from seizing the initiative. At one point, our slingers even charged the enemy lines, having exhausted their ammunition to buy us time to finish off the infantry. Then, just like that, we had the enemy surrounded, and a final charge of our Sarissa lancers saw the day in our hands. The battle had been won, and the main Egyptian force repelled south. We did, however, pay a fair price for this victory. We lost our elephants, which were used to buy us time at the bridge, as well as a number of units of pikemen. At this point we realised how much we had wounded the Egyptian pride, as a peace offer was sent. The council voted in a closely contested poll that we would push them back across the Nile, then re-evaluate whether we wanted peace. With this in mind, our army, after some quick replenishment and training, headed towards Jerusalem, a well-located city and surrounding fortress that would act as an excellent defensive bastion if we could capture it. As we knew the enemy's armies were operating in the area, a quick attack was vital, so we assaulted with only 2 hastily constructed ladders. The enemy had heavily fortified the walls with skirmishers, as we saw from the sheer volume of flaming projectiles being sent from the walls. With only 2 ladders, it was vital that we kept the enemy busy while the hulking constructs were pushed towards the battlements. We did manage to get them up against the walls, but they were both smoking heavily, and there were still fire arrows battering off of them. We had to get onto the walls, and quickly. As a desperate melee broke out, we realised just how much damage our skirmishers had been doing. Many of the enemy's forces on the walls lay dead or badly bruised, and a space had been cleared allowing our hoplites to get a grounding and start pushing the enemy from our corner, which we had occupied. Our hoplites had opened a gap on the walls, and we now had some breathing room, so we sent all of our infantry up the ladders. Before we knew it, we had the enemy surrounded on the lower ground behind the walls, and it was not long before the remaining forces threw down their arms and dispersed into the countryside. However, we could not claim victory quite yet, as numerous Egyptian forces were in the area, including the remnants of the army we defeated at the bridge battle, surely after revenge. We prepared the defences as we would likely have to defend the recently conquered city. It did not take long for our prediction to come to fruition. The Egyptians began the siege and brought every man in arms to Jerusalem. It appeared that the fight for the city was not over. We decided that with the city defences still in a state of disrepair, we would man the walls with skirmishers and retreat from them before the enemy could engage us in melee, leaving traps that had previously been set to disrupt them on their advance towards us. Our army was battered and bruised, and this would not be an easy battle. With our skirmishers having done their job, they retreated from the walls after setting fire to multiple ladders. They took the safe route back and avoided our traps. Now, the job of defence fell to our pikes and hoplites, who would be holding the choke points within the town's streets and squares. The enemy had 3 possible routes towards the centre of the town, and they were attacking us via all 3 simultaneously, meaning our already battered army was being stretched thin. The weakest of these being the approach that we had littered with our traps. Of course, this would be the one the enemy would concentrate on. As the battle progressed, we realised that we would have to slowly move more and more troops to the trapped approach, as that is where we were struggling the most. And just as it was beginning to look grim, one of our other fronts managed to break the enemy. Our pikes, with the assistance of some Sarissa lancers, broke the enemy and found themselves able to run at the enemy, who were already engaged in the centre street of the town. Needless to say, they did not last long and were run through by our Sarissas. With the enemy's fronts against us slowly being chopped away one by one, we found ourselves using the choke points to our advantage and enclosing entire enemy units between tightly packed hoplite formations. The day was ours. Jerusalem was finally safely in Seleucid hands. With Stream 1 coming to a close, we ended by moving ourselves into position to take Salamis from the Egyptians. We sieged the harbour with 2 navies and had 2 land armies poised to go, which is where we will resume the next stream. To summarise, we have managed to repel the Egyptians back to a point where the Nile now acts as a natural border between us, and have improved both our economy and food situation. We do still rely heavily on trade, which does have its pros and cons. Our satrapies are still under our banner, but the question remains, for how long? As always, thank you for watching. I appreciate any feedback and look forward to the next one. Please note, these are recorded live on Twitch where I stream Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays at 8 PM British Standard Time.